All right, let's have a little conversation about white privilege and racism in this country. Because so many people are trying to whitewash the history of this country and the fact that there are real racism, prejudice, institutional racism, structural racism, and white privilege that exists all too often in this country. So here's a couple of examples from recent events in this country. One is about how the justice system is clearly not equal. Take a look at these four men who happen to be Republicans who tried to vote for presumably Donald Trump by putting somebody's ballot forward that wasn't their own. They tried to fill out, in many cases, a dead relative's ballot and try to vote in an election, which is illegal. And they were held accountable. They were found. They were held accountable, but they were punished for a day, a few hours, a couple of days, very light punishments.
All four of these men were all found guilty of committing voter fraud in the 2020 election. The gentleman in the upper left, he's a Republican from Nevada. His wife died several years ago. He nevertheless filled out her ballot and cast it in the presidential election. He then participated in efforts with the Nevada Republican Party to claim that his dead wife's ballot being cast in the election must mean there was mass voter fraud by Democrats. He is the one who cast his dead wife's ballot. He's a Republican. He got caught. He was sentenced to probation. That's the guy in the upper left. Guy in the upper right, he's a Republican elected official from Ohio. In his case, it was his father who died, and he cast his dead father's ballot in the 2020 election. That Ohio Republican official was sentenced to a grand total of 3 days in jail. Keep going clockwise. The gentleman on the lower right, he's from Pennsylvania. In his case, it was his mother who had died. He nevertheless cast her ballot for Donald Trump in the 2020 election. He was caught. He got probation. And then the last guy, lower left there, he's another Pennsylvania Republican whose mother also died. Apparently, he couldn't help himself. He cast a ballot in her name in the 2020 election. He got caught. He got probation.
Then you take Pamela Moses, who's a black woman who had a felony conviction and did not realize that she could not vote because of that in the state of Tennessee. She was not told that. Apparently, her parole officer and others told her that she could vote. They gave her, notice. She was never taken off the voter rolls. So she voted in her own name. She didn't try to cheat the system. She didn't try to, vote twice by putting her, filling out somebody else's ballot. And she was sentenced to 7 years in prison.
Now, this is Pamela Moses of Memphis, Tennessee. This week, Ms. Moses was also sentenced for a crime related to her efforts to vote in the 2020 election. Ms. Moses had a felony conviction in Tennessee that legally resulted in her not being allowed to vote again in that state. But she says that nobody ever told her that that particular conviction meant that she couldn't vote. And moreover, her county elections board never took her off the voter rolls. In 2019, when she discovered she had been declared ineligible to vote, she sought formally to have her voting rights restored.
So clear discrepancy here, right? There was malice on the one hand, where people were filling out ballots for a dead relative, which is clearly illegal. And then on the other hand, somebody who was given bad information was trying to vote and exercise her rights and held to a different standard. And we could have a whole conversation about how we need to make sure that people that have been convicted of felonies, that once they've served their time, they should be able to have full voter rights restored. That's a whole conversation that we 100% need to have in this country. And some states have, done the right thing and do restore voting rights. Some states even allow people that are in prison to vote. But the fact that you have a felony conviction, you serve your time, you come out, and then it's illegal for you to vote ever again is absurd. And in this case, this woman was just trying to exercise her right to vote and was punished an insane amount of time. 7 years for just trying to vote in her own name. It's absurd. And I would say 100% would not have happened if this was a white man or a white woman. Now we take another look at what white privilege looks like in society. This viral video that's been going around from a mall fight between two teenagers in a mall in Jersey, where clearly there's a fight between a black teen and a white teen, both males. And eventually, police, I guess, are called or they show up. I don't know. They come and they break up the fight. And instead of holding both young men accountable for their actions and separating them and trying to arrest them or whatever, both cops slam the black boy to the ground, put their knees in his back, and handcuff him. The white boy, on the other hand, is just, here, have a seat on the couch.
Andrew. No, go right out there. Go right out there. Right here. Get up. Get up. Get up. Right here. Go outside right now. Go outside right now. You're talking to individual. What are you going to do? You know I have my face. Oh, shit. Come outside. Come outside.
Oh, shit.
Yo.
No, bro. Chill. Brian, get up. Brian, leave. Holy shit.
Nah, nigga. What the fuck?
Holy shit. Oh, no. Holy fuck. Yo, it's because he's black. Racially motivated.
I mean, utterly ridiculous to see that happen in 2022. And it's something that we probably don't see happen, that does happen more often than we'd like to admit it. And racial profiling is a very real thing. There's another story recently of a man who called the police and then was arrested himself because he was thought to have stolen his own vehicle. He reported his vehicle missing, somebody had stolen his vehicle, and then the cops showed up and arrest him because he was black. I mean, the amount of things that black people can't do in this country without being seen as, somebody being suspicious of something, somebody following them, all these, Karens that are going out and shouting at people, calling the police on black families for doing nothing. I mean, that story about that young girl that was trying to raise money by selling water bottles and then had the police called on her. There's so many examples of this. And there is a different America. There's two different Americas for white people and black people in this country, and for other people of color, but especially black people. And we need to talk about it more. And until we get to a place where we can openly admit what's going on and really, really dissect why and how we can break down these barriers and these boundaries and these prejudices and these just long-standing racism, it's never going to get better. And instead of trying to make it better, you have Republicans across the country that are trying to whitewash history and are banning books in schools, books about Martin Luther King Jr., about Ruby Bridges. It's absurd. And you have this, bill in Florida that is trying to protect white people from having their feelings hurt when schools learn about racism and the history of this country. That's their priority. More white supremacy, basically. We're not doing enough. And increasingly, we're seeing white supremacy coming out from the woodworks. We're seeing people come out from, the shadows. They've been emboldened by where the Republican Party is today. And you have open white supremacists that are running for office. You have people that are proud to announce that they are a white supremacist or a white nationalist or a Christian nationalist on social media, in the public. You have this prosecutor in Spokane, Washington, whose wife has been posting horrible, horrible things, racial slurs, openly saying that she's a white supremacist, and he's trying to say, oh, well, I don't share the views of my wife. You're a prosecutor. How can we expect you to treat people equally and to seek, equal justice, blind justice under the law, when your wife is out there proudly shouting from the rooftops on social media that she's a white supremacist. I mean, the fact that people are so concerned with protecting symbols of white supremacy in this country instead of focusing on what the real history is and talking about racism is a problem. The fact that we teach slavery as part of black history and not white history is a problem. The fact that we don't look at the history of our country and understand that it was founded on racism and genocide and Christian nationalism in forced conversions of Native American populations, of converting, black African slaves to Christianity when they came over. We need to talk about this more. And we're not. We're not doing a good enough job from, at home with our families, not doing a good enough job in schools. We're definitely not doing a good enough job at the federal level of government. And in the media, I mean, how many times have we seen a white teen depicted in the media with like the best lighting, the best photo, the best description of them, and then a black teen, who had committed some kind of crime with like the worst photo you could find on social media? How many times have we seen young white men get off for rape and sexual assault and sexual violence with a slap on the wrist? How is that happening? Why is that happening? It shouldn't be. Like I keep saying, we need to do better. And if you don't believe that white supremacy, white nationalism, Christian nationalism, and white privilege exist and that they are a serious threat to our country and to our democracy, then you're part of the problem.